UN Security Council. Russia backs India, says India is a worthy candidate for permanent membership within the United Nations Security Council.
Хочу это особенно подчеркнуть, исключительно за счет расширения
exclusively through broadening the representation of the countries from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. We note India and Brazil in particular as key international actors and worthy candidates for permanent membership within the Council, whilst at the same time unilaterally and mandatorily raising the profile of Africa. It is very important today to make sure that all member states unequivocally, without reservations, reaffirm their commitment to the purposes and principles of the Charter as a first and necessary step to restore collective responsibility for the fate of humankind.
And joining us now is our senior executive editor, Abhishek Kapoor. Abhishek, Russia backing India at the UN for permanent membership of the UN Security Council. Give us a sense of the implications and the significance of the statement made by Lavrov.
Well, Rukma, we have to understand there is certain impatience building up among regions which are not represented in the United Nations Security Council on a permanent basis. So be it South Asia and, of course, India being the most important claimant. And then we have seen Latin America, Brazil wanting to be there. Africa goes absolutely underrepresented. So all these nations have had different kinds of groupings. There is the G4, for example, between Japan, India, Germany, and Brazil. There is L69. There was a statement of 39 other nations which clearly said that patience with the stalled processes of UN reforms is running thin and that we need to do something. So there is a mechanism for UN reform which has been talking about increasing the strength of permanent members in the UN Security Council, and those are called intergovernmental negotiations. But those have been very informal negotiations with no text and no structure there. So one demand that has come out is that those should move to text-based negotiations where a record is maintained of all these meetings. So I believe the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov there, I believe, responding to the scammer that has gained strength in the 77th session of the UNGA. And we have seen, of course, our External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, mentioning about the same in his address at the UNGA last evening itself. So I think the Russians might be being sensitive. We have seen obstructions coming in from China, and generally otherwise the rest of the P5, but for China, are supportive. And it's ironic that it was India which batted for China's entry not just in the United Nations in 1948, but also its permanent membership of the UNSC as part of the Asia Bonhomme. And we have seen since then China evolving and becoming very Middle Kingdom centric, and in the case of India at least, using its veto and its permanent presence in the United Nations Security Council to the detriment of common international objectives like fighting terror as well, about which also incidentally Dr. S. Jaishankar mentioned in his speech yesterday. So I think this is the comment made by Sergei Lavrov is in line with international sentiment. It's just a matter of time before the rest of the world also realizes that a great mass of humanity goes unrepresented in the UNSC in the present scheme of things. And India, to begin with, of course, has the most important claim, a most strong claim to become a permanent member, be it its size of economy, be it size of population, or our contribution to the greater common good, as we do, for example, as we did, for example, during and post-pandemic. So I think we have reasonable claim to become permanent member of the UNSC. Almost every nation which has some decision-making influence within the United Nations scheme of things understands that, and the Russians essentially endorsing that. It's not that this is the first time Russia has said this. and they are traditionally friends of India, and they have been talking about it. It's just that now this UN reform has to go beyond talking and get into serious stage of action.
Right. Abhishek, also some of the statements that he made, very telling here. He said, Sergei Lavrov that is, said, the West is undermining confidence in international institutions. Also, you talked about an international sentiment that's growing. Could it have been exacerbated by the West's attitude, the West's posturing during the time of the Ukraine war? Because he says here that the United States was trying to turn the whole world into its backyard.
Well, yes. So essentially, United Nations is a diplomatic top shop, Rukma, and the 15 days or the fortnight of the UNGA provides opportunity to every nation to really push across their own agenda. We have seen over the last few months how the war in Europe has panned out, causing disruptions in supply chains, in fuel supplies, food supplies, adversely affecting energy and food security of the world, not just of Europe, about which incidentally again External Affairs Minister mentioned in his address last evening at the UNGA. But what is important is that Russia indeed is in a back-to-the-wall fight with the West on Ukraine. West, of course, projects it as a fight between autocracy and democracy. But going beyond that, the Russians might have, a couple of points there against the West insofar as their position on Ukraine is concerned. We have seen now in the last week itself, President Putin has upped the ante and scaled up the Russian military offensive and consequent recruitment from the reserves, which essentially shows that we are looking at a long winter of war in Europe, despite all the protestations. Remember, Prime Minister Modi said this is not an era of war with Putin by his side, and the same was repeated by External Affairs Minister in his UNG address. But it seems nobody is listening. The disruptions are perhaps benefiting some people, and indeed war is seen as an opportunity to scale up investments and perhaps test weapons. We don't know. What are the ultimate objectives? Russia, of course, says that this is about its own sovereignty, and the West is impinging upon it with the expansion of NATO where it was not needed, with the Russians claiming that sometime in early 2000s they had offered to become members of NATO, so that there is no reason whatsoever to fear Russia as an adversary. So I think all those issues are there, but in the present context, in the backdrop of war, Sergei Lavrov, of course, punching a few Russian objectives there in his overall press conference, but Indian takeaway being that he mentioned the UNSC reform, and in that context he talked about other regions that need to be represented, but India is the only nation he mentioned by name. So I think in that sense it does help that Russians are reiterating their position that India should be becoming a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council. We have been UNSC non-permanent member this past 2 years. Our term is ending in December. Of course, the West might see this projected bonhomie by Russia as an issue because they are in a pitched standoff with Russia on Ukraine, and they might show this as another proof that India has taken a very neutral position, which they perhaps don't appreciate, and they would have wanted us to take a little more pro-Ukraine or pro-West position vis-a-vis Russia. Having said that, UNSC reform is an idea whose time has been well past decades, and it's high time that we go beyond making these statements, and as the communique of 39 nations said, that we have to move from general informal negotiations to text-based negotiations, so that a structure for restructuring of United Nations is quickly worked out.
Right, Abhishek, many thanks for joining us there and for putting the statements of Sergei Lavrov, Foreign Minister of Russia, into perspective in that manner. So, Russia backing India's permanent membership of the UN Security Council. A major breakthrough as far as reforms in the UN Security Council for India that India has been calling for a long time now are concerned. And external